Tonight, you are not preparing to sleep, you are preparing to plant something. Most men close their eyes and drift into whatever thoughts happen to follow them, never realizing that those final moments before sleep are shaping everything they will become. And so they remain the same, night after night. They carry worry into rest. They replay failure. They whisper quiet doubts to themselves and call it thinking. And then they wake up wondering why nothing has changed, why progress feels distant, why wealth seems reserved for someone else. It is not reserved, it is directed. The mind you carry into sleep is not idle. It is active, receptive, obedient. It accepts whatever you impress upon it in those final moments, and it does so without argument, without resistance, without hesitation. That is where power begins. Let me ask you something you may have never considered. What is the last sentence that echoes in your mind before you fall asleep? Not the one you say out loud, but the one that repeats quietly when the world goes silent and you are left alone with yourself. Because that sentence is shaping you. It is building belief. And belief, repeated long enough, becomes identity. Most men never choose that sentence. They inherit it from their fears, from their past, from the environment they never questioned. And so they continue to repeat the same internal script, one that limits, one that weakens, one that quietly keeps them exactly where they are. That is the real trap. Not lack of effort, not lack of opportunity, but lack of direction in thought. Because the subconscious mind does not think, it accepts. It receives what you give it, and through repetition, it transforms that into behavior, into expectation, into results that feel natural but were carefully planted over time. This is the law. And it does not wait for your permission. It works whether you guide it or not. Now imagine this. Instead of drifting into sleep, with scattered thoughts, you enter that state with precision. You give your mind a command clear, definite, repeated with feeling, and you do it consistently, without interruption. Something begins to change. The thought becomes familiar. The familiar becomes believable. And what becomes believable begins to shape your actions without effort. That is how wealth is formed in the mind, before it ever appears in your hands. You have heard the words before, I am a millionaire. But most men say it once and dismiss it. They repeat it without emotion, without belief, without persistence, and then they wonder why it produces nothing. Because repetition without feeling is empty, and feeling without repetition is temporary. But when both are combined, something powerful is created. The idea moves deeper. It begins to take root. And over time, it replaces the old patterns that once controlled your thinking. That is when change becomes real, not forced, but natural. Tonight, you are not here to casually listen. You are here to impress. Each auto-suggestion you hear is designed to enter your mind when resistance is lowest, when the conscious guard is fading, when your deeper mind becomes more receptive than at any other time of the day. That is the moment most men waste. You will not. You will use it, because in that quiet state, repetition becomes powerful. The words you hear are not just heard, they are accepted. They begin to shape how you think, how you feel, how you act when you wake. And that is where results are born. not in one night, but in consistency, night after night, without interruption. Most men will not do this. They will listen once. They will feel a moment of inspiration, and then they will return to old thoughts, old habits, old patterns that quietly erase any progress they could have made. But the man who persists becomes different. He returns to the same thoughts until they replace what was there before. He listens until belief forms. He repeats until identity shifts. And once identity shifts, everything follows. So tonight, do not treat this as background noise. Do not drift. Do not let these words pass through you without intention. Listen as though your future depends on it, because it does. These 7 auto-suggestions are not just phrases. They are instructions. Instructions that, when repeated, begin to shape a new version of you, a version that thinks differently, acts differently, expects differently. A version that no longer hopes for wealth, but moves as though it is already his. And when a man begins to think that way consistently, without doubt or interruption, he discovers something most men never will. That wealth is not something you chase, it is something you become. Thought by thought, night by night, until the man who once repeated the fodder words becomes the man those words describe. There is a moment each night that passes unnoticed by most men, yet it holds within it the power to alter the direction of a life. It is not a moment of effort, nor of visible action. It is quiet, subtle. It arrives when the body begins to rest and the mind releases its guard. It is the moment before sleep. If I were to begin again, I would give this moment greater attention than any other. For it is here that the conscious mind begins to withdraw, and the deeper mind, obedient, receptive, unquestioning, begins to accept what is presented to it, not with resistance, but with readiness. Most men enter this state without awareness. They carry into it the remnants of the day, fragments of thought, impressions of fear, traces of doubt. They do not select what they think, they allow it. And in allowing it, they surrender control at the very point where control is most possible. The subconscious mind does not reason, it does not debate, it does not reject, it receives. And what it receives in this state, it holds with greater force than thoughts entertained during the day. If I were beginning again, I would not approach sleep as rest alone. I would approach it as instruction, for the thoughts that enter here do not pass. They are impressed, repeated, strengthened in silence. There is a distinction that must be understood. A thought entertained during the day may be interrupted. It may be challenged. It may be replaced. But a thought carried into sleep continues without interference. It is repeated without effort. It becomes familiar. And what becomes familiar begins to feel true. If I were beginning again, I would not treat all thoughts equally. I would choose those that enter this final state with care. There are many who wonder why their condition does not change. They act, they attempt, they apply effort, yet they carry into sleep the same thoughts that produce their present condition. They reinforce what they wish to escape, and in doing so, they remain. If I were beginning again, I would correct this at its source, not in action alone, but in thought, especially in the final thought of the day. There is also the unseen activity of the mind during sleep. The body rests, but the mind continues. It organizes, it processes, it strengthens what has been impressed upon it, and it does so without interruption. If the final thought is one of doubt, that doubt is reinforced. If it is one of direction, that direction is strengthened. If I were beginning again, I would not leave this process unattended, for unattended processes do not produce desired results. They produce repeated ones. There is also the matter of repetition. A single thought has little effect, but a repeated thought gains strength. And when that repetition occurs in a state where resistance is low, its influence increases, night after night. The same thought, the same impression, the same instruction, until it is no longer a thought, but a belief. If I were beginning again, I would use this repetition deliberately. I would not allow it to occur by accident. There is also the formation of internal condition. A man does not act only according to what he decides. He acts according to what he believes. And belief is not formed through a single act of thinking. It is formed through repeated acceptance, especially when the mind is most receptive. If I were beginning again, I would not attempt to force belief during the day. I would build it at night, where resistance is lowered, where acceptance is easier. There is also a visible difference between men who use this moment and those who do not. One awakens with uncertainty. He hesitates. He questions. He reacts to conditions. The other awakens with direction. He proceeds. He acts without unnecessary delay. This difference is not created in the terms morning. It is formed the night before. If I were beginning again, I would become the latter, not through intensity, but through consistency. There is also the importance of selection. The mind will accept whatever is given, whether chosen or not. Thus, the responsibility is not to control the mind entirely, but to choose what is presented to it. If I were beginning again, I would select my final thoughts deliberately. I would not allow chance to determine them. There is also the gradual nature of this influence. Change does not occur in a single night, nor in a single repetition. It is formed through return, night after night, without interruption, until the thought becomes familiar, and the familiar becomes accepted. If I were beginning again, I would not expect immediate transformation. I would expect gradual certainty. There is also the connection between thought and identity. A man who repeatedly impresses upon his mind a certain idea begins to align with it, not suddenly, but steadily. His thinking adjusts, his actions follow, and in time he becomes what he has repeatedly accepted. If I were beginning again, I would shape this identity deliberately through nightly impression. There is also a final understanding. The mind does not become what is wished. It becomes what is repeated. And repetition, when combined with receptivity, becomes powerful. If I were to express this as instruction, I would say, guard the final moments of your day. Direct them. Use them. Let this be fixed firmly within. I choose what I impress upon my mind. I direct my thoughts before sleep. I build my condition through repetition. Repeat this not as encouragement, but as practice. For the mind, when guided at this moment, begins to follow without resistance. And what it follows, it becomes. Thus, if I were to begin again from nothing, I would begin here, at the threshold of sleep. For it is here that thought becomes instruction, instruction becomes belief, and belief repeated night after night becomes the foundation of the life. A man eventually lives. Having understood that the final thoughts before sleep are impressed upon the deeper mind, the next principle, if I were to begin again, is to recognize that repetition alone is not sufficient. A thought may be repeated many times and yet produce little. Another, repeated fewer times, may take root. The difference is not in the words, it is in the feeling. For thought without feeling is weak, and feeling without repetition is temporary. But when both are combined, they create influence. If I were beginning again, I would not merely repeat words. I would give them life. There is a tendency among men to treat autosuggestion as mechanical. They repeat phrases. They speak them plainly. They expect result. Yet nothing changes. And they conclude that the principle is ineffective. It is not ineffective. It is incomplete. For the subconscious mind does not respond to words alone. It responds to the emotion attached to them. If I were beginning again, I would not speak without feeling. I would feel what I speak. There is also the nature of belief. A man does not believe because he says something once, nor because he desires it. He believes because he has repeated an idea until it becomes familiar. And familiarity, when accompanied by feeling, becomes acceptance. If I were beginning again, I would not attempt to believe immediately. I would build belief through repetition, through emotion, through persistence. There is also the early stage of this process. At first, the words may feel distant, uncertain. The man repeats them, yet does not fully accept them. He feels resistance, doubt. This is natural, for the mind accepts what is familiar, not what is new. If I were beginning again, I would not withdraw at this stage. I would continue, for repetition reduces resistance. There is also the role of imagination. A man may not yet believe a statement, but he may imagine it. He may feel it as though it were true. And in doing so, he begins to introduce emotion. If I were beginning again, I would use imagination deliberately, not to escape reality, but to shape it. For imagination provides feeling, and feeling strengthens impression. There is also a transformation that occurs through this practice. At first, the man repeats with effort. He must concentrate. He must apply attention. But as repetition continues, the words become easier. They return more naturally. They feel less foreign, and eventually they no longer feel like suggestion, but like truth. If I were beginning again, I would continue until this point, for it is here that belief begins. There is also the connection between belief and action. A man does not act consistently upon what he wishes, he acts upon what he believes. If belief is weak, action is uncertain. If belief is strong, action becomes direct. Thus, the purpose of repetition is not to produce words, but to produce belief. If I were beginning again, I would focus on this outcome. There is also the necessity of consistency. A man may repeat a thought once with feeling, yet if he does not return to it, the impression fades. It is replaced by what is repeated more often. If I were beginning again, I would return nightly, without interruption, for continuity strengthens impression. There is also the visible effect of emotionalized repetition. A man who has impressed belief upon his mind appears certain. He does not speak with hesitation. He does not act with doubt. He proceeds. Others notice this. They recognize conviction, and conviction influences. If I were beginning again, I would not seek to persuade others, I would persuade myself. For self-persuasion produces natural expression. There is also the example of men who have applied this principle. Henry Ford did not merely think of success. He repeated it. He believed it. He felt it as certain. And through this, he acted without hesitation. His belief preceded his result. If I were beginning again, I would follow this pattern, not by imitation, but by understanding. There is also the danger of empty repetition, words spoken without attention, without feeling, without intention. Such repetition produces no effect. It is sound without substance. If I were beginning again, I would avoid this. I would not repeat carelessly. I would repeat deliberately, with presence, with conviction. There is also the gradual strengthening of feeling. At first, emotion may be slight, but as repetition continues, it increases. The man begins to feel more certain, more aligned, and in this, belief deepens. If I were beginning again, I would allow this feeling to grow, not forcing it, but reinforcing it. There is also a compounding effect. Each night of repetition adds to the previous. Each impression builds upon the last, until the thought becomes dominant. And what is dominant influences all others. If I were beginning again, I would trust this accumulation. For it is not immediate, but it is certain. There is also a final realization. Words alone do not change a man. Feeling alone does not sustain him. But repeated thought, combined with feeling, transforms him. If I were to express this as instruction, I would say, repeat with feeling, and continue until it becomes belief. Let this be fixed firmly within. I feel what I repeat. I give strength to my thoughts. I build belief through repetition. Repeat this not as encouragement, but as construction. For the mind, when given repeated emotionalized thought, accepts it. And when it accepts, it believes. Thus, if I were to begin again from nothing, having guarded the threshold of sleep, I would do this next. I would give life to my words through feeling, through repetition, through persistence, until what I say is no longer uncertain but believed, and what I believe begins to guide everything I do. Having understood that repetition, when combined with feeling, produces belief. The next principle, if I were to begin again, is to recognize what that belief must be directed toward. Not vague improvement, not general success, but a definite condition of mind. That condition is wealth consciousness. For wealth does not begin in possession, it begins in thought. And thought, when repeated and accepted, becomes expectation. If I were beginning again, I would not pursue wealth as something distant. I would construct the consciousness that produces it. There is a distinction that must be clearly understood. A man may desire wealth, he may wish for it, he may even work for it. Yet if he does not think as one who expects it, he remains separated from it. Desire alone is not sufficient. Expectation is required. If I were beginning again, I would move beyond wishing. I would expect. For expectation influences action. There are many who think continually of lack. They consider what they do not have, what they cannot do, what is beyond their reach. And in repeating these thoughts, they build a consciousness of limitation. This consciousness governs their behavior. They hesitate, they avoid, they remain within narrow bounds. If I were beginning again, I would not allow such thought to be repeated, for what is repeated becomes condition, and condition determines result. There is also the role of autosuggestion in this transformation. A man may not yet possess wealth, but he may begin to think as though he will. He may repeat the idea of possession. He may feel it as certain, and in doing so, he begins to alter his internal condition. If I were beginning again, I would not wait for evidence before belief. I would build belief before evidence, for belief precedes result. There is also the importance of definiteness. A vague thought produces vague result. A definite thought produces directed action. A man must not say, I desire improvement. He must say, I am becoming a man of wealth and control. He must repeat it, feel it, accept it. If I were beginning again, I would make my thought definite, clear, unmistakable. There is also a resistance that may appear at first. The man repeats a statement of wealth, yet he feels contradiction. His present condition appears different. His mind questions. This is natural, for the old pattern resists replacement. If I were beginning again, I would not withdraw at this stage. I would continue, for repetition weakens resistance. There is also a gradual shift. At first, the thought feels distant, then familiar, then acceptable, and finally natural. The man no longer feels that he is repeating something foreign. He feels that he is stating what is true. This is wealth consciousness, not declared, but formed. If I were beginning again, I would continue until this condition is reached. There is also the influence this has upon action. A man who expects wealth does not act as one who lacks. He does not hesitate unnecessarily. He does not avoid opportunity. He moves, he decides, he proceeds, not because he forces himself, but because his thinking directs him. If I were beginning again, I would focus on this alignment, for action follows expectation. There is also the perception of others. A man who has formed wealth consciousness appears different. He speaks with certainty. He carries himself with direction. He does not appear uncertain in his dealings. Others notice this. They recognize confidence. They associate it with capability. And in this, opportunity is extended. If I were beginning again, I would build this condition within, For external response follows internal state. There is also the example of men who have achieved greatly. Andrew Carnegie did not begin with possession. He began with belief. He formed within himself the certainty of achievement. He repeated it. He acted upon it. And in time, his results reflected his thinking. If I were beginning again, I would understand this clearly, that wealth is not first acquired, it is first accepted. There is also the danger of contradiction. A man repeats wealth in one moment, yet thinks of limitation in another. This weakens the impression. It divides thought, and what is divided loses strength. If I were beginning again, I would reduce contradiction. I would repeat one direction consistently until it becomes dominant. There is also the compounding effect. Each night of repetition strengthens the previous. Each acceptance builds upon the last, until the idea of wealth becomes natural, expected, certain. If I were beginning again, I would trust this process, for it does not require immediate result, only continued repetition. There is also a transformation of identity. The man no longer sees himself as one who desires wealth. He sees himself as one who is becoming it. This identity changes behavior. He no longer acts as he once did. He acts in accordance with what he believes. If I were beginning again, I would allow this identity to form fully, through repetition, through feeling, through consistency. There is also a final realization. A man does not attract what he wants. He attracts what he is prepared to accept as true. And what he accepts repeatedly becomes his condition. If I were to express this as instruction, I would say, think as one who possesses. Repeat until it becomes natural. Let this be fixed firmly within. I expect wealth. I think as one who receives. I build my condition through repeated thought. Repeat this not as encouragement, but as creation. For the mind, when given repeated direction, accepts it. And when it accepts, it expresses it through action, through decision, through result. Thus, if I were to begin again from nothing, having built belief through feeling, I would do this next. I would construct wealth consciousness through autosuggestion, through repetition, through unwavering direction, until what I think is no longer separate from what I expect, and what I expect begins to shape. The life I am steadily bringing into reality, having formed the beginnings of wealth consciousness. The next principle, if I were to begin again, is to understand that no external result can exceed the quality of a man's internal dialogue. For every man speaks within himself constantly, not always aloud, but continuously. And what he hears most often, he believes. This inner conversation is not always chosen. It is often inherited, formed through repetition, through environment, through past experience. And because it is familiar, it is accepted without question. If I were beginning again, I would not accept this internal dialogue as fixed. I would examine it, for what is repeated within becomes command. There is a tendency among men to allow their thoughts to wander unchecked. They revisit old events. They repeat past failures. They speak inwardly in uncertain terms. I am not ready. I am not capable. This may not succeed. These phrases are not harmless. They are instructions, repeated quietly, accepted gradually, and expressed eventually. If I were beginning again, I would not permit such language to remain, for what is repeated within cannot remain without effect. There is also the principle of mental habit. A man does not think randomly, he thinks according to pattern. And pattern is formed through repetition. A thought repeated often becomes easier to recall. A thought recalled easily becomes frequent, and frequency creates habit. If I were beginning again, I would not attempt to stop thought entirely. I would reshape it, for habit cannot be removed. It must be replaced. There is also the process of replacement. A man must introduce new instruction, deliberately, repeatedly, with attention. He must speak inwardly with clarity, with direction, with certainty, not occasionally, but consistently. If I were beginning again, I would take control of this inner voice, not by silencing it, but by directing it. There is also a resistance that may appear. The old dialogue will return. It is familiar. It has been repeated. It carries influence. At first, the new instruction feels unnatural, forced, uncertain. This is expected. If I were beginning again, I would not withdraw at this stage. I would continue, for repetition weakens the old and strengthens the new. There is also a transformation that occurs. At first, the man must speak deliberately. He must remind himself. He must choose his words. But with time, something changes. The new thoughts begin to return without effort. They appear naturally, and the old ones diminish. This is the formation of new habit. If I were beginning again, I would continue until this stage is reached. There is also the importance of clarity. A vague instruction produces vague result. A man must not say, I will improve. He must say, I act with certainty. I move with direction. The mind responds to what is clear. If I were beginning again, I would speak clearly within myself, without confusion, without contradiction. There is also the effect this has upon emotional state. A man who repeats uncertain thought becomes unsettled. A man who repeats directed thought becomes composed, not through force, but through alignment. His thoughts no longer oppose one another. They move in one direction. If I were beginning again, I would not seek calm directly. I would create it through ordered thinking. There is also the visible effect. Others begin to notice a change. The man speaks with greater clarity. He responds without hesitation. He appears grounded, controlled, not because he has forced himself, but because his inner dialogue has been directed. If I were beginning again, I would not attempt to appear composed. I would become composed through internal order. There is also the connection between inner dialogue and action. A man who speaks inwardly with doubt hesitates outwardly. A man who speaks inwardly with certainty proceeds. Thus, action is not determined in the moment. It is determined in thought, repeated thought. If I were beginning again, I would correct action at its source, within. There is also the importance of consistency. A man may direct his thinking once, yet if he does not continue, the old pattern returns. It is stronger, more familiar. If I were beginning again, I would return to the same instruction, night after night, until it becomes natural. There is also the gradual disappearance of effort. At first, the man must think carefully. He must choose his words. But over time, this changes. He no longer struggles to direct his thinking. It becomes automatic. And when it becomes automatic, it becomes identity. If I were beginning again, I would pursue this condition. There is also a final realization. A man does not become what he wishes. He becomes what he hears within, repeatedly. And what he hears most often, he accepts. If I were to express this as instruction, I would say, direct your inner voice. Replace what weakens. Repeat what strengthens. Let this be fixed firmly within. I choose my thoughts. I direct my inner voice. I repeat what builds me. Repeat this not as encouragement, but as discipline. For the mind, when guided consistently, follows. And what it follows, it becomes. Thus, if I were to begin again from nothing, having formed wealth consciousness, I would do this